Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Afterlife podcast. This is your host, Pooja Chilakuri, and I'm very excited to interview my guest today, Sammy Simpson. Sammy has a diverse background in radio, marketing, communications, and corporate leadership. Sammy is also a ayahuasca journeyer turned preacher and soulful guide on a mission to light the spark of divine consciousness in every individual, thereby initiating a ripple effect of positive change throughout humanity. His mantra, anybody can be a catalyst for change. And I'm so excited that he's here to speak with us today. Welcome to the show, Sammy.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I met Sammy about, I think it's been 2 years ago when I was a guest on his show. And then recently I had the honor of returning to that. So I really enjoyed his production, the Just Show Up show. But before we get to that, you ended up in the world of radio. Can you share a little bit with us how that happened?
Sure. Yeah, I'm very fortunate that I knew very young what I wanted to do. I knew communication was always in my path. It was in my mother's path, and she was a telephone operator back in the days when we used to have those folks that would do those jobs and had a very good career, but always wanted to be on the radio. So she would talk about that when I was young, and I just fell in love with this idea of you would get to entertain and play music and talk with folks that would just make them feel good. And that just seemed really like what a great way to make a living and to have a career. So I started very young and got in the business when I was only 16 years old, and just kind of surrendered to learning and growing. And it built this wonderful career over 30 years that took me from a little small town in North Carolina all the way to New York City. So it was a good adventure.
And I just, learning a little bit about your background, you've had a very rich career. And from there, you transitioned or you ended up on a spiritual quest. I wouldn't say transition because you're still doing it. I love your show. So how did you end up on a spiritual quest?
For me, I think it's been there my whole life. I always say that I was getting those little pokes or whispers from the time I was at a very young age. My grandmother would go to church and buy into the dogma of you die and go to heaven, but then she would also come home and read my fortune with playing cards. And so there was this interesting mix that I was always kind of curious about. I was reminded recently, my mom would also tell this story when I was a kid about being out on a date with a gentleman, and it was not such a good guy. And they were in this diner, and her father, who had passed away when she was very young, she would tell the story of like, I felt I saw him in another booth when I was in this kind of
Mhm.
moment of needing that warning signal or sign. So from a very young age, I was being opened up to this idea of look beyond what's obvious, essentially, and look at the supernatural and all these different ideas. And that just really escalated throughout my life. And it really amplified around 2003, 2004, as I started catching some generational patterns, as I would have an argument at the time with my wife at the time. And suddenly I would walk away from those and I would be like, well, what were we arguing about? I couldn't even remember it. And then I was catching these little glimpses of, wait a minute, this is the way my parents argued. And I'm like, ooh, and it was just kind of one of those moments of like, oh my goodness, I don't want to be that. I don't want to carry this on. And that kind of just started me going down the rabbit hole even further. And then from there, I went through my marriage ending, my mother dying all in a year. And then I'm introduced to ayahuasca, which found me, as I say it always does. And then that intensified the spiritual journey even more, where I really got to meet myself and really see that I could love myself through the work of the journey work. And then it just opened up this wonderful meditation practice for me that opened up a research. And I always say I get to time travel into ancient Egypt or into outer space. And because these little messages would come through that I would be recording in my notes. And and a lot of them would not make a lot of sense to me. So I thought, well, I trust that they're coming from some place that,
Mhm.
I should look into this. And it's just really helped me kind of put it all together today around the idea of what I use the word interconnectedness. And it's really
Mhm.
just kind of opened my awareness that when you really step back and you look at, the whole universe, you can just really see where everything is interconnected in your inner world and your outer world. And I just find that's just a wonderful portal to explore and to ask better questions around.
Wow. As you were speaking, there was so much going through my brain that I want to unpack with you. The first thing I want to tell you, Sammy, is when I hear you speak, you don't sound a whole lot different from the people that I've interviewed that have actually crossed over because they were clinically dead. And when I listen to you, that gives me hope that we can experience some of those things while we're still present in this body,
Yeah.
right? The interconnectedness is a big thing that they talk about, that they embodied and they experience, and that doesn't leave them when they get back, right? And you've been fortunate enough to tap into that and access that. And I think you and I have connected on this belief that we can access heaven here, that we don't have to wait. And so I appreciate that. And also, when you talked about your mom seeing her father on that date that she was at, yes, that's another belief I have dearly, is that the relationship doesn't die when a person leaves, right? It continues. You've been on this incredible journey and you created the Just Show Up podcast. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to do that?
Sure. Well, it's a good segue there because, speaking about having that connection even beyond this life, that has been a big part of the path with my own mother. Is I started, like everything in my life, where I really honor the work is all the things that were supposed to find me have found me, from radio to just this path. And in around 2016, I was at a corporate business dinner. I mean, the most untraditional place ever. And there was this wonderful lady, a friend of mine named Penny, who I'm convinced is an alien. So I will say that. And she just has that kind of aura about her. And she turns to me and we get in this conversation about the Akashic Records. And I have no idea what the Akashic Records are at this point in my life, but she said, you must meet my beautiful reader friend, June Brought, who is just one of the most extraordinary humans I've ever met. And my very first reading, they're not psychics or mediums, but past relatives can come through the record. And it was very fascinating that that very first reading, my mother came through the record and she gave me a symbol of a happy face. And she gave me this wonderful, poem or mantra. She said, the life you love is the one you'll have. The love you share is so beautiful, like the best rainbow ever. Never doubt your happy face will light up the world as it already has in so many ways. And so that was just another level for me of really listening, because as I put that together, the rainbow is harmony,
Mhm.
interconnectedness, another
Mhm.
clue in the what I call the soul alchemy. So all
Mhm.
these clues are coming in. And then the Just Show Up was another product of that. It was in, I think it was either 2018 or 2019, when I typically do an Akashic reading every year and work with June. And then I transpose those into what I call guides. And they
Mhm.
just have so many of these clues we're talking about. But it was that 2018 or 2019 reading where the masters and teachers said through the record, start a clubhouse and just have people show up to uplift and be inspired with no
Mhm.
other purpose, to really demonstrate that, the masters and teachers always say through the Akashic record is the biggest lesson is embrace not knowing. I don't need to know.
Mhm.
And life will communicate what it needs you to do and
Mhm.
how to be in the world. And the Just Show Up is my attempt at really being the example of bringing that teaching to life, is that you can just show up with no other purpose, with no answer, without being anything, and you'll have this incredible, profound result that comes out of it. And so far, that's been my experience with the show.
And it's a very beautiful thought. And let me tell you something, Sammy. The first time I heard just show up is a phrase, right? But honestly, the first time I really paid attention to that phrase is when I came on your show for the first time. I think it was over COVID in 2020. And that actually became my mantra.
Oh, nice.
I've been practicing those 3 words. I'm like, okay, don't feel like doing it, just show up. Don't be
Yes.
afraid of the outcome, just show up, right? It helps you to let go of your preconceived ideas and judgments about how something might turn out, right? And then
Yes.
honestly, when we just show up, it could be very magical.
Yeah, and and I think it really comes back to, when we think about just that, for me, what's kind of profound, Pooja, as I look through this is, I was told early on that I was on the path of the alchemist, and I was always very curious about, okay, well, what does that mean? And I would research alchemy. But what I've come to find is that, the more you just show up and you're in, people, you hear a lot of people talk about just be present. And it's kind of like, okay, well, what's presence, right? But I think it's just that idea for me that I started really paying attention that these clues and messages were coming from many different places. Like that clue of just show up. I had done an ayahuasca journey, and I had written down in my notes that night, just show up, don't know an answer, or be anything first. And
Mhm.
then this Akashic reading comes along, and there it is again. And you start to find that, to me, that's what this is really about, is the masters and teachers in the Akashic Records says the more we surrender each step, the mundane becomes extraordinary. And
Yes.
then we open ourselves up for these, what I believe my mother was saying to me. She said, make your happy face light up the world as it already has. Is
Mhm.
that really was the clue for me to say, well, wait, delight, joy is really what the soul's trying to do. And the Akashic Records say your soul isn't childish, but it's childlike, and it's just
Mhm.
here to experience this physical existence. So there's this constant, like, the more you let go of all that mental weight that we carry from moment to moment,
Mhm.
the higher you can fly. And the higher you're flying, then your observation, like the eagle flying above the world, you can kind of look around and go, wait a minute, I see that. My experience has been is, wait a minute, this clue, this message for me has been coming in multiple places with a frequency to it that it keeps showing, oh, wait a minute, that's for me. It's already smiling at me. I can trust that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you just made me think of this in a different way. That the just show up is, in a way, it's you are, that is surrender, isn't it? It's
It is.
just a different, yeah, yeah. That I just hit me when you were talking.
Right. And surrender, and that's a great point, because it's interesting that you'll notice that the surrender word can be it can be a beautiful landing for many, and it can be a trigger to uncomfortable, almost pain for others. And that's why, and I've had this conversation with many people over the years, when I will say surrender every step, and they will go, oh, well, no, no, surrender, I'm out on surrender. And it's like,
Hmm.
so it's kind of like, this is a way to say, be the example that when you look at these surprise and delight that comes out
Hmm.
of, and with the just show up, what I find is, as you know, as being a part of it, is you come in with absolutely knowing nothing about, you just know we're going to talk about awakening or spiritual, wherever it goes from that kind of
Yeah.
higher awareness.
Yeah.
And then pulling a random card, finding a topic. And then what I find is, every single time there is something that surprises and delights about the topic, or has a synchronicity about it, or brings out, sometimes the first thing people will say is, it's not a coincidence. This topic came up today because I was just doing blank around it. And I'm like, that's the magic of just showing up.
That is the magic of showing up. And you made a very interesting point about the word surrender. being a trigger because we think, what are we surrendering to? But, Sammy, when I think of that word, I'm not thinking of what or who I'm surrendering to. I'm thinking of what am I giving up, and as giving up fear.
Yeah, well
It's like
put.
letting that go. Yes. And also listening to you, I do want you to just kind of explain just the high level of what Akashic Records are, because of two reasons. A, I'm not very well versed in that, and I don't know how many people listening might know what that is. So could you just
Yeah, I think the simple version is you think about infinite intelligence, an internet of the universe. Let's just call it like that. And you have the ability. There are many people that are great readers, and I would certainly say if you have interest in it, spend some time researching it for yourself. But essentially, your soul leaves an imprint on every lifetime.
Mhm.
And the way that I've come to really understand it for myself is that there are these masters and teachers that you can tap into this infinite intelligence yourself, but then also you can tap into these different dimensions of yourself, because
Mhm.
there's really a belief there that if there's only one, as they asked the great guru, what do we tell the others? And he said, there are no others. And if everything is a reflection in, you are just kind of a part of that source that is infinitely reproducing itself to experience a physical existence, then there is all these things that you've went through and lived through, that you can tap into. And that's where I find it interesting. I don't know, I will say that, like, I'm not going to come and say there is an absolute definite. What I can tell you that in my own investigation, I don't know how else I would have come to this awareness had there not been something beyond me that was always guiding me here in the first place. And I,
Mhm.
and I, in my alchemy, I've put these clues together in the most obscure symbolism, from the happy face to a worm. I always say what tickles. And like when you think, and I started researching because the worm came up in a meditation that I had many years ago that said that in another dimension, a being or beings called worms were overtaking a protector called silence to find a new way to search for the light. And I'm like, what does that even mean? And as I started really researching the term, this metaphor of the worm, well, even Jesus on the cross said, I am the worm, I am not a man. So
Mhm.
you start thinking about the afterlife in those areas and the resurrection, and I've done a lot of research around those things, is, and I would constantly just say, like, what tickles? Like, if something tickles your soul, like it delights you, where you're not having any thoughts or any baggage, then you're present. That's your barometer of presence. And then
Mhm.
the worm is kind of in there. What happens when you uncover the dirt and a worm comes and sees the light? It starts wiggling. So all these little things were these interesting symbolisms and study of, hey, it's all pointing to this interconnected. And the more that I can surrender each step, the more I get this great delight of, oh my gosh, I can't believe the clue came through that song or through that history or through that person. And it's very, I just find it's a very interesting way to be present.
And isn't that interesting? While you were speaking, what popped in my head is the phrase, the pursuit of happiness.
Oh yeah.
And listening to you sounds like that's, how you accessing it is through presence. It's
Yeah, and just the clues. I find it, I just find it so, just opening the mind and opening your heart in a way to where you're letting go of the mind is always going to have edges to it, because
Mhm.
our mind can only go so far, but our heart is free and abundant. And
Mhm.
my masters and teachers always say, we're kind of in the lookout tower in that head all the time, looking around for, where's this going? What's going to happen?
Yep.
But the more you can kind of drop down into your heart and just find, that's where, to me, the fearlessness lives, the
Mhm.
limitless lives. And
Mhm.
suddenly all those things that we put ourselves in a cage, or boundaries around ourselves, or feeling we lack, suddenly starts to dissolve as you start living this way, because then you'll challenge those beliefs that you felt were untouchable or unbreakable, and you'll see that there's probably a crack in the armor there.
Yes. But I do have another question for you because this is a question that plagues me often. We talk about the interconnectedness and the love, but we live in a world where we often experience very harsh edges, just like, it's not just our brains, right? It's a reality that we are experiencing. So, do you have a difficult time integrating that part of you with what's going on around?
I do. I think you want, I think it's a lot of, this is a meaty topic, as you know, very
I
much.
know.
Like everybody, for me, I will come back to, I do enjoy, kind of studying this part of the world because it seems, when I did my first ayahuasca journey, it was just so fascinating, Pooja, because I was taken to this void, and there were all these entities around me, and they were
Mm,
almost celebrating, like you're back. And I was very confused. This was a bit of the trippiness of ayahuasca. And
mhm,
then I was introduced to this great shaman, is the way that I would
mhm,
describe him or them, whatever they are. But he took me into nature and just showed me the most beautiful harmony of the blue
mhm,
skies, the clear waters, the green forest. And he gave me, which kind of really put this together as well. He said, all is within your nature. And as I started studying that, it took me all the way back to the ancient Mongolian shaman, way back
mhm,
before, in the earliest of civilizations. They
mhm,
practiced something called Tingrism, which was a belief that all could be one with the universe. So these clues kept showing up, but it seems like as we've continued to grow as humans and a species, and there's all kinds of great meaty conspiracy theories around that, but the mind has continued to separate itself
mhm,
from that harmony. And I think the further we get away from nature, through everything from the foods we eat to the way we're indoctrinated, I mean, there's
mhm.
so many things that you kind of have to step back and be aware, but not be, as my masters and teachers say, be in this world, but not of it.
Oh,
And
yes.
then you can start to look at those kind of things and say, okay, I see you. I see what's going on here, but I'm not going to be caught up in the, oh my gosh, I'm on this loop of what the government's doing wrong, or that sort of. I think and I know that's a tricky balance, but I think you've got to find a way to kind of drop in, but not get stuck there.
But not get stuck. Yes,
Yeah.
that is one of my favorite quotes. I think Jesus also said that. It is one of my favorite quotes, and I'd forgotten. So thank you for reminding me, being in the world, but not of it.
Yes.
Right. So that's a very beautiful thought. Thank you, Sammy. And I know that talking to you, I feel like I could go on forever. Such rich experiences there that I want to mine. And I know you were writing a book. Are
Yes.
you okay to talk about that a little bit and share a
Of
little bit?
course. Yeah. Well, the book was another part of just kind of this interconnected work, is that I, uh, I have always, I've written several things over the years, and I've kind of been called to write that way. But then I went through another journey, a big meditation journey. And in that journey, I was specifically called to preach, which I was like, okay, what does preach mean? I'm not religious, I certainly respect all religions, but
Mhm,
I would say I'm more spiritual, and I sometimes even call it awareness. But it kind of took me through my life on this retrospective, and it said, we're going to show you all the places where we've been kind of calling you to do this. This is where radio fits in. This is where your marketing background fits in. This is where your communication knowledge fits in. This is where that researcher loves to read. All those things were just kind of, again, interconnected. And then it went on and it said, we want to challenge you to write what would be a modern day Bible of truth, which really intimidated me a lot, to be honest.
mhm.
So I've spent a number of years kind of putting it together, but I definitely have the basis now. And it's interesting because this is where you and I connect, is I call it the keeper of heaven.
Mhm.
And I call it that reason for what I said a little bit earlier. Growing up, I was very enamored with my grandmother, that would go to church every chance she could, and really felt like, I have to struggle through this life to die to make
Mhm.
it to paradise, to go to heaven. And I was always curious about that. And I was like, well, why do we have to wait? And really, the keeper of heaven is that culmination of all these things we've been talking about. My life, I believe my purpose is putting this kind of alchemy together that pulls this interconnectedness through everything to say, every one of us are being guided in this direction. And the more we can get out of our way and really surrender to the joy of living, and we'll find that heaven on earth. And I do believe that's possible. And that's what this is about.
That is amazing. I want to be one of the first ones to buy that book and have you sign it if you're going to be in town, because I know you're traveling right now. But and we do connect on that, Sammy, because one of my favorite phrases is from the prayer that Jesus taught, on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah.
So,
And I
yes.
just think, and to me, it's really interesting, Pooja. I know, you study a lot of your studies and writings too, even when you did the episode of the Just Show Up, and we really talked about this idea of what you've learned in your research, that it's really what you're doing now is setting up the afterlife.
Yes.
And I think it's so opposite that we forget that we live, and what came to me, it was interesting, even after our interview, because I had kind of thought of that, but I really started to dig into it a little more. And it just, in my Akashic records, they will always say, the more you heal yourself, the more you heal the entire universe. It's a ripple effect. So it's almost like dropping a pebble in a pond, and you see that water go out 360 degrees, that frequency. And I was always fascinated by that. And then after interviewing you, I'm like, it makes perfect sense that this again is all interconnected, is that we come here, I believe, in my thesis of doing all this research, to really, our souls come here to clean up that karma and all that, break through that generational baggage. And then if you look even deeper, to go into the Christos consciousness, which is really what I believe Jesus was saying to us, is you have the same power to do what I do, to become the light that can light the darkness inside, to get out of the enslavement of the mind and resurrect the soul into this beautiful, back to the source of the Father, essentially. And I just think that we kind of have it upside down. We really need to teach that this life is about taking that life energy, and that's where you can heal all of this. And you don't have to wait, because you'll experience heaven, and then in the afterlife you won't be stuck in that karma again. You won't need to come back. You can move on.
You can move on. That's beautiful, Sammy. And what you were saying earlier, thank you for saying that. And I'm going to repeat it, because I struggled with this, and I'm sure there's people that struggle with it. Healing ourselves sometimes can feel like a selfish act, that we're, the self-love, the self-care, all of the efforts that we're making. But in fact, it's not. It's a universal act.
Oh, exactly. And that's a big part, Pooja, that I really like to remind everyone that I meet, is that it's always an inside job. You save yourself, because when and people say to me all the time, well, that sounds great to me. I'll absolutely do it. But well, except for my kids and my mom. And I'm like, and I respect that, but I always remind them that you have to choose yourself over every single thing in the universe. And I mean, you have to be first. And that can sound like, oh my gosh, is that narcissist or anything? It's not in that sense, not for your benefit, but for your healing. And that's a very different state of becoming, which is the greatest gift you'll give yourself ever.
Absolutely, Sammy. And listening to you, another thing that popped in my head, you probably are familiar with the works of Eckhart Tolle. And his book, The New Earth, I believe I was reading, and he talks about the pain body. And it's the collective, right? We're all born into this. So each one of us heals, we're making that pain body less weightier, right?
Yes.
It's
And you've
easing
got your
that.
piece, and and that's what makes it tricky, I believe, is that you have the pain body of what you kind of come into this family origin, this generational baggage, all these things. And then you've got the grander collective there on. So you get your part of all of it. And that's why just the surrender to the light body, because
Mm-hmm.
really, if you look at, if you study like Kundalini and you look at
Mm-hmm.
the raw body, as they call it,
Mm-hmm.
and there were even mystery schools. Some believe that Mary Magdalene was a student of the sex magic of Ra and actually trained Jesus in order to become the light body and use that to resurrect. So there's all these things that when you look at that light body, I think that you can connect in your own way, but you'll see the possibility in it for yourself. And in that, you will be doing your part to help kind of the entire universe.
And you're definitely doing yours. And I know your mantra, anybody can be a catalyst for change. And
Absolutely.
I think that's why we're doing what we're doing, because and I always feel like nothing is scripted. When I talk to people, I feel like magic happens. There's just that resonance, and then there's a co-creation, and we just allow it to happen. It's been so much fun talking to you, Sammy. I could go on and on, but
That's
one last question that I have is I want people to be able to find you and find your shows. So I'm going to include all the links that you've sent me, but what is the best way to reach you? Would that be your email?
I would say just go to my website, which is my name,
Okay.
sammysimpson.com, and you'll find everything about me there in one place.
And I'm going to do a shameless plug for your show, The Just Show Up. It's on YouTube, right?
It is.
Yeah. So if those who are listening, if you want to hear more from Sammy and his guests, the Just Show Up is on YouTube. And I've really, really enjoyed speaking to you today, Sammy. Thank you so much for being honest and open and sharing all of your journey with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.